So we've all been told, I'm sure, never start a talk with a graph. So the first thing I'm going to do is start my talk with a graph. This graph is actually why I get excited when I get to work in the morning. Believe it or not, it looks boring, right? But most of my team, actually, engineering, product managers, get excited about this as well. And the best part is that graph doesn't mean anything. It's fake data. But if I got this graph by studying you all in the room, I'd be very excited. Because clearly there is a trend. Excuse me, could you put the monitor back on this side? Thank you. And if there is a trend, we can write a paper, we can get published, we can make very good business decisions, sound business decisions, because clearly they're backed by the data. The fact that there are a few dots above and below the curve doesn't really matter. You know, there's always a few weirdos in the room. You've got one on stage, that's fine. We recognize each other when we got in. More importantly, though, it doesn't matter because I can just delete those dots. I can delete those dots because they're measurement errors. And we know that they are measurement errors because they're messing up my data. You laugh, but we do that every day. I mean, we've trained our data and analytics teams to do that. I mean, even back at university, we trained business analysts, economists, mathematicians to delete data in supposedly statistically valid ways. And that's great if you want to find the line of best fit. How many, on average, meals the average American is having every day? 3, fantastic. But if you're looking for performance, innovation, creativity, you've deleted the very data that you should be studying. So let's put those back and start analyzing them. Because that trend, was it right? Was it the primary thing? Was it really the thing we're interested in? Maybe not. Start annotating your data according to a taxonomy of sport, athleticism. Who's running? Anyone doing jogging, marathon, ultra trail? Well, there you go, another trend here. Is it a secondary trend? Does it invalidate our first one? Maybe, maybe not. Let's look at it from a geospatial perspective. People at the back, you probably don't hear me as much. People at the front, if you're in the green section, you can hear me really well. We can also analyze the data according to time. I'm sure in the room there are a few people waiting for an operation or a medical appointment. That medical appointment has been set, but you don't know about it yet because the letter's still in the post. By temporality, the difference between when something happens and when you know about it. So data isn't flat. Data are just not dots on the charts. In our organizations, we've transformed that approach, which is essentially a cult of averages, into a complete science, a complete set of governance and policies, which we call data quality. And that's really preventing our businesses in many ways to operate optimally and to innovate correctly. So don't get me wrong. I mean, I mentioned that about data quality. That's only one aspect of the data quality challenge and practices that we have in place, but that is the very damaging one. I also don't want you to think that I'm mixing here data governance and data quality. Data governance is essential. Lineage, provenance, all of those things, critical things that we need to develop as a muscle in our organizations. So let's zoom in for a minute and look at the structure of those dots, because they're not really dots. They are contexts. Every single one of those data points is a complex, very dense network of information by itself. Structured data, unstructured data, labels, export control, technical metadata, and non-technical metadata mix-ups. Relationships, knowledge graphs, geospatial, time information, as I just mentioned. And all of those things are highly interconnected. that interconnection, that really dense network, is what we call a knowledge graph. And that's what's turning data into insight. Data, individual data points, individual elements, turning into knowledge by being connected. In the world of AI, it is becoming even more important. And for us, it's really an interesting development because we've been doing data fabric, data mesh, knowledge graph for years. I mean, some of you, I met yesterday, we've been working on projects together for like 7, 8, 9 years together. That's not new. But what's new is the way we can now leverage that information to drive AI. And the reason I use data quality and the practices around data quality as an example is because in the age of AI, silencing those data points is even more damaging. With the LLMs, with the AI algorithms that are available today, not only can we derive the additional information from those outliers and get their benefits, but we can also and should also make sure that bad data stays in the graph and labeled as such. Because if you don't have exemplar bad data, how do you train your model in recognizing bad data and making or supporting your business decisions going forward? John covered that to a large degree, but I just want to go through an illustration and demonstrate the power of the 360-degree view that those technologies bring together. And 360 with the knowledge graph is great. I mean, we've got all of the information available. We can really build a vision of a product, of an entity, of a person, but only with the information we've got in the graph. And there's always some element of data that didn't make it into the graph. Why? Because, well, it's too dynamic, or there's no political will, or the cost of moving that data in the data hub was too high. So the advent of the agentic RAG allows us to, at query time, federate data from external systems. John covered that and presented the concept of MCP. I'm going to take you through an illustration of such a use case. Imagine you're one of those poor civil engineers coming into this building site in the morning. Is this a one-off freak event, or did you not study the environmental factors here? It's going to happen every 3 weeks. Well, the point is you need to do something about it. So how do you deal with that problem? The question you ask yourself is, what is the best dam-proofing method for dealing with those concrete piles that are in standing water? What product should I use? Is it available? What qualifications do my staff need to have in order to apply it? It's a multifaceted question. And go back to John's presentation and searching in a traditional sense. How do you go about it? Well, until now, you'd extract a few keywords. You would look over the search engine or the document repository containing all of your tech spec, and you might get a few documents that are relevant. You then need, on your own, to decide what the next steps are. Where is the ERP where you can find the availability information? Actually, do you even have access to it? Do you need to call up someone? And the reality is you probably would be calling your suppliers, who probably would tell you, well, I don't know, let me go back to my engineering team, et cetera, et cetera. The promise of agentic RAG is to turn that around and make the information available at your fingertips. How? First of all, by analyzing the question, realizing that it is actually a multi-stage question and answer problem. Doing the search, retrieval augmented generation search, over the technical spec data to identify the products that are suitable. Coming back to the agentic framework and deciding, well, actually the next step is to go to the ERP and find out what data is available. Which products are really there? Is it in suitable quantities? And we've now short-selected a handful of products, and we can go back to maybe another information source, a database, a search engine, a CMS, where we retrieve the security, safety, and application information. So we've now got not a set of documents that I need to read, appraise, and decide the next step for, but we've got a comprehensive and actionable set of results. Let's look in details at the workflow behind the scene. The user has described an information need over on the left. That information is routed to our agentic framework. And in this particular area, Yogesh mentioned it, following the acquisition of Nuclear, we've got some fantastic new technologies that we've added to the Progress Data Platform. Nuclear have trained their own agentic routing model for those types of operations. Decipher a query, decide where to get the data from, and reassemble that data. So in this particular case, the agentic model, the agentic routing model, decides that step one is to go to a RAG source. That might actually be an iterative process because the first query might not be returning the right set of documents. So go at it a few times until the data set is exactly what we're looking for. Next step is an MCP call out to the ERP. It might be one or several, and maybe after the ERP call, after the MCP call, we need to go back to the RAG source and get more data. What you've seen as well is a blue arrow going back to the user, requesting more information, more disambiguation, because a query might not have been sufficiently precise to be fully answered in the first place. Once that data package has been created, we've essentially created and retrieved all the data necessary for the prompt. And actually, a little bit of clarification here, because what type of data do we want in that prompt? Well, some of it is document data from the tech spec. Some of it might be graph data that are coming from the ontologies and the knowledge graph we talked about. So it is a hybrid of graph RAG and document RAG. Don't worry about the terminology if it doesn't make sense. It'll be covered this afternoon. We've got a dedicated session on agentic RAG, and we can go through some of the details. So once we've got that payload, that prompt, fully formed, we can pass it over to the LLM that will generate the response. And you can see here there are several LLMs in play. We've got the model for routing, and the agentic router model, essentially, and we've got the generative model to produce a response. But can we trust the models? And actually, can we trust our users? And the answer to that is probably both no. So guardrails are added to the mix in three places. First of all, in analyzing the query that's submitted to the system. Why? Because, well, we want to make sure our users are legal, decent, honest, the questions are genuine, formatted in the right way, all those things. The second integration point for guardrails is in the prompt. We want to make sure that the LLM receives a prompt that contains all the data, but also directives about how we want to control the response that is generated. And coming back from the external LLM, the guardrail system is there to validate that the data, that the information, the summary we receive back from the LLM is actually respecting the directives that we provided. So with that approach, we've now got a true 360-degree view of the information. Everything that is in the graph and everything that was missing from the graph retrieved in real time, summarized and validated against the use case and against our guardrails. So let's go very quickly through the pipeline that allows us to build that. The first stage is acquiring data in our data fabric, in our knowledge graph. That's going to data sources, retrieving information, fetching information, that's listening to events, receiving data streams, all of the things that John actually covered on the product architecture slide earlier on, with products like Data Direct, etc. The second stage is data assembly. And this one, you may wonder why I'm actually calling it out. The reason is MarkLogic is primarily a document database. Yes, it is a great search engine. Yes, it is a great graph engine, vector engine these days. But behind the scene, we represent things as documents. And data in source system are rarely documented in the first place. So there's an element of ETL that is required here to assemble those documents. And I know ETL is in our space, and you probably heard me say that tons of time, in projects that we've done together. ETL is a bad word, right? Because we prefer ELT. That's where the data agility comes from, transforming and retransforming as a use case is evolving. The reality is it's an ETL TTT, right? And there's always an element of transformation on ingest that is required. Of course, the next stage is indexing and managing that data, MarkLogic, and enriching that data. Enriching that data is an iterative process. We don't want to boil the ocean when we start. Start with just enough for the use case. Evolve as the use case is evolving, as the demand from the user is evolving, as the source data is evolving. And data enrichment can be done in many different ways. First of all, mastering, because data from those different systems rarely align directly. Primary keys are different, foreign keys are different, some systems are not keyed at all. So smart mastering is step one. How do I map my data across those different sources? And that's a MarkLogic Data Hub product. The second stage of data enrichment is very often rules-based. Corticon. How do I align the data that is structured? Conversion of unit, validation of entitlements, the definition of rules for discount, for statistics, all those sort of things. Different type of enrichment is semantic enrichment, annotations, labeling, fact extraction. So what is the information about? What facts does it contain? How do those facts relate? And you can start seeing here the graph element starting to emerge. The latest addition to our enrichment pipeline is the Progress Agentic RAG product, which brings model-based enrichment and analysis to the stack as well. So John presented the Agentic RAG product as a way to retrieve information, and it's true, it is one of those key values, but it is also agentic enrichment of data on the way in, and that's something that is also a really interesting development for us, especially when it comes to things like recognizing tables in financial documents, recognizing entities. Yes, we've already had semantic-based and NLP-based entity recognition in the products. Adding model-based gives us a different perspective, a different type of enrichment, which is more readily available, requires less training, requires less modeling up front, but not necessarily giving the same level of precision on the output. So we've now extended the offering, essentially, so we can balance the quality of the results and the speed of getting to that. The next stage is data retrieval. I'm not going to do a lecture on optic. I'm sure there are some breakout sessions out there covering that. But in the same way that we are multimodal, we are truly multimodal database, a truly multimodal platform. Multimodal data retrieval is something we rarely talk about. I mean, if you listen to the blogs, read all the blogs, the articles, etc., you'll find that there's the Cypher world, there's the Sparkle world, there's the SQL world. Fantastic, but they are all looking at one specific dimension of data. With MarkLogic, with the Progress Data Platform, we are truly multimodal. We needed a way to retrieve multimodal data, and that's why we created Optic, and we are really pushing Optic. I know a lot of you are currently involved in projects where we're discussing that. It is really important if you want to be able to get the full power of the multimodal database. APIs are great. Max type support, etc., is a mainstay of what we're doing, but it's not enough. We need to help you build applications. So Last year, we released Fast Track, which is a visualization set of libraries, very well received, and we're integrating all the feedbacks that we received from you. I think we've seen some really fantastic application built on top of Fast Track. And the addition of the Progress Agentic RAG with its self-service RAG interface, and all of the metrics and all of the feedback loop is also a great addition to our client application and integration stack. Of course, none of that would be useful if it was static. Data decays the minute it is acquired, the minute it is enriched. So the feedback loop is a critical element. And feedback comes in many ways. By looking at the interaction between users and data, the way they're searching, the way they're acting on the results, the way they're voting up and down on the documents, on the chunks, on the responses that are being presented to them. And in the way they are suggesting additional terms in ontologies, for example. The advent of LLMs and AIs has also allowed us to add to that feedback loop the analysis of the user interaction and the data interaction directly back into the model. So John mentioned Remy earlier on. That's one of the great examples of that. In Semaphore, there are also a number of items on the roadmap about analyzing data, analyzing interaction, and enriching models as we go. So those are the sort of developments that are really transforming the life cycle of that data agility, accelerating the pace of enrichment, accelerating the pace at which you can arrive at data quality. And I'm going to skip this slide because John already covered it this morning, and it's great. Nothing else to add. Let's spend a minute reviewing what we've achieved in the product over the last year. The first achievement, and I hope you all know about that because I've been blowing that trumpet and really sending to all of you a lot of marketing content about it, is the release of MarkLogic 12. MarkLogic 12 is a critical release. It is a foundational release for our AI strategy. It is bringing together vector search, graph algorithms, and BM25 relevance. So those three together are pivotal for the RAG strategy. Why? Because when we think RAG, when we read RAG, we always see vector search associated with it. Well, vector search is only one aspect. It's actually a very limiting aspect. It's great if you've got a few 100,000 documents. It's great maybe if you've got a few million documents. But, and I don't know how many of you are following data science blogs and those sort of things. There was an article recently, a research paper, recently by Google, demonstrating the limits of vector search in different, comparing the size, the dimensionality of the vectors with the number of documents it can actually identify correctly. And those are small. I mean, it may sound big if you read the paper, but actually the vast majority of you in the room have document volumes in MarkLogic that are 10 times, 100 times, thousands of times bigger than the limits that Google has documented in their research. So we need to do something different. That something different is blending together vector search, natural language search, probabilistic search, and graph search. We feel actually very vindicated by that research. It's fantastic. And it's something that we've been doing with many of you, putting in production that combination of technologies. In MarkLogic 12, we've also added virtual views, which brings a new dimension to the analytics capability of MarkLogic, not having to pre-calculate all the TDs or all the projections. And that's allowing us to give you more flexible analytics. And I want to highlight this one because I've been talking about AI for most of the morning. AI is great, but there are also really tangible use cases not involving AI, and that's one of them. On the Semaphore side, we've been adding more modeling capabilities, boosting the productivity, and adding capabilities around semantic interoperability. I think this one is a really important one. You probably all know that Semaphore is a SCOS Excel-based modeling with some element of AL. We're adding to that listening to the feedback of our customer base, adoption of things like BFO, et cetera, which for those of you who are still around tomorrow afternoon, I think there's a dedicated session on Semaphore where those sort of things can be explored. On the data direct side, we've been adding more capabilities around data ingestion, new data sources like the Microsoft Fabric support. And because it's a relatively new addition to the platform, I mean, it's a long time progress business, but a new addition to the platform, we've been working on bringing data direct on the same security and standards footing as the rest of the platform, because we understand that things like FIPS compliance, et cetera, is really critical when it comes to most of our federal projects. On the Corticon side, the effort has been centered on incorporating AI to help build rules and explain rules. Explainability is critical. Explainable AI, human-in-the-loop AI, those are things that our teams are spending a lot of time researching. We're going to talk about that later on in the panel, but predictability, repeatability is something that is really critical for our customers. And we need to bring that to the RAG experience, to the agentic RAG experience. And of course, I've been talking about data agility, accelerating projects once they're live, but getting to the point where we can launch a project is really critical. And a lot of you have expressed a need over the years of how do we set up our project very quickly? How do we set up the infrastructure, configure that infrastructure? So over a year ago now, we've released the Progress Data Cloud, which is a fully managed version of our Progress Data Platform on Azure. We've transitioned most of our Semaphore clients onto it now. I think there's only a couple left. And we're seeing great adoption. For those of you in the federal space, we've actually opened up our US Gov zone in Azure now. And we're in the process of deploying in Europe as well for those of you that have GDPR-type compliance requirements. All of those achievements are great, but they're only useful if you adopt them. So that's where I call upon all of you to accelerate your adoption of our products. I was talking to some of you yesterday evening, telling me how great MarkLogic 9 and 10 are still, and how fantastic they are as backbones of your organization. True, I'm very pleased that the product is so great, but that scares me. It scares me because the security market, the security landscape around us is such that if you're still running on systems that are 7, 8, 9 years old, how do you protect yourself? Not only against the security issues that might be in our software, and there are some. I mean, we've published some CVEs. We're constantly updating our third-party libraries to address security challenges. I mean, we're disclosing that with you on a very frequent basis. So it's not only with our stack, but it's also with the operating system stack. You need, if you want to protect your data, to also protect your system, to update your environments, your systems, and the software that we provide to you. But that's only one aspect. Because all of that conversation around AI that we just had, well, to power your AI projects, to really leverage your data, you need the latest versions of our software. And very often, I walk into project meetings or QBRs with some of the key customers, and I'm hearing a data strategy that doesn't line up with the systems that are in place. Why? Because you've got great ideas, a great strategy to change the business, to drive your business from data, but you're still operating on a system, on version of a software that is 5 or 6 years old. So that's really something I want to insist on. Please adopt our latest releases. The next 5-10 minutes will all be about roadmaps. And when we think roadmaps, that's probably the sort of templates that your product management teams are using. A beautiful road almost straight, well-spaced out milestones going 3, 4, 5 years into the future. Aligned communication strategies, KPIs, the entire gamut. That's not what I'm going to do, right? Because the reality is that the pace of technology changes has completely derailed this view. And if I was giving you a promise for something which is 2 years out, 3 years out, I'd either be lying to you or be completely disillusioned. And we'll probably be out of business before that's implemented anyway. Because the reality of it is something like this, no, probably more something like this, right? Where every few days now, new LLMs, new models, new capabilities, new strategies, new data technologies appear that may change the way we do things in 3 months, in 6 months. Some of them are good ideas, and we might adopt them. Some of them, experimental, maybe good ideas. Let's evaluate them and very quickly discard them, or embrace them and be at the forefront of innovation. On the agentic side, we've taken a bet, we did some research, we decided actually it was really worth investing. I mean, the quality of results was shooting up significantly. We've done projects where it took us from mid-50s to high 90s in terms of accuracy and groundness. That's the sort of things that help us decide investments in those sort of technologies. So the next few slides are not a roadmap. They are an intention. What are the parameters we're considering? What are the things that we want to invest in to prove or disprove? And I think I need to frame that a little bit because very few of you in the room are software vendors. The majority of you are working in the industry, manufacturing, healthcare, pharma, in the federal space. Your vocation is not to write software. Your vocation is not to be a software editor. That's our job. So part of the plan, part of our roadmap, is to make sure we evaluate those technologies, we integrate those technologies where it is relevant. So you don't have to. So you don't have to have a team of PhD on staff and 5 or 6 Scrum teams just doing AI research. That's our job. So the promise of the data platform is to essentially meet with you at both ends of the workflow diagrams that I had earlier on. Make sure that you can carry on ingesting data in the same way you are today and tomorrow. You can consume data in the same way you are today, tomorrow, and the day after. And that we will take care of the sausage making in the middle, right? So today it works, tomorrow it works, the day after it will work even better because we've maybe changed some LLM, some models, some data architecture on the inside. But that's something that we will package up for you. So the drivers for our roadmap: accelerate time to value. That's always been the case, so that's not new. Reducing the total cost of ownership. That's an important one. As the FinOps model around AI, around hosting, around cloud, etc., is changing, we need to evolve our approach to architecture to make sure you can benefit from those cost reductions. And of course, data security. I can't insist enough about that one. And that comes also from adopting our releases. Remember the message from the previous slide. And delivering new AI capabilities. A few more details, and I think you probably have all seen that slide in some of the roadmap roadshows that we're doing on a regular basis, but a little more detail on the platform modernization aspect. Platform modernization is an important one. GPU technologies is changing, CPU architecture is changing. I know a lot of you are in conversation about ARM support, for example, Graviton support, those sort of things, which can reduce TCO. So for us, that's a really important aspect of the roadmap as well. But performance, scalability, security, all of those aspects are also critical. The way we were designing clusters on-prem 10 years ago is completely different from the way we're designing clusters in cloud environments, whether public or private, nowadays. So together with that change in essentially environment, we need to provide changes in our software to accompany you on that journey. So looking at each of the product in turn very quickly, on the MarkLogic side, Graviton support is critical. Integration with agentic RAG is critical. All the modernization around scalability, observability is, of course, critical as well. And we are already well on the way in that journey. You've seen some of that arriving in MarkLogic 12, and you'll see more of it arriving in upcoming releases. On the semaphore side, we're continuing with the modernization, with the acceleration of the time it takes to do radical model changes. Incorporation of the feedback from users, whether they are directly from the user interaction or from the data and how the data has been processed, enriched, and interacted with. On the data direct side, more of the same, more data sources, better security, modernization of the platform. And one capability that we don't talk about often enough is a hybrid data pipeline capability. Because as we move our systems to the cloud, as we move our data platform to the cloud, some of the data, some of the legacy applications is still on-prem. And how do you marry together data on-prem, data in private cloud, data in public cloud? And that's really the aim of the hybrid data pipeline, federating data wherever it comes from. On the Corticon side, further AI research and modernization to support the user in the context of the Progress Data Platform instead of just Corticon standalone. On the cloud side, more certification. And you will notice, for those of you that are interested, in the later bottom right, we are actually participating in the new FedRAMP law initiative. So early days, because as you know, I think it's what, X20, something like that, I think the name of the program. Very early days, we're investigating that, and it's one of the later element of roadmap. But if you are interested in helping us in that journey, because that's something you want to do, Steve Rice over there, our product manager for cloud, is available if you want to go and lobby for that. So what have we achieved, and what are we trying to achieve and continue to achieve with our roadmap is help you build AI applications end-to-end. And that end-to-end element is really critical because it starts with data ingestion, all of the data enrichment, the orchestration of both the acquisition and enrichment of the data and the query, also retrieval of information. And with a recent addition of the Progress Agentic RAG, conversational and agentic AI experience and insight. All of those things will be discussed in details in the breakout sessions this afternoon and tomorrow, and I invite you to join as many as you can. Before lunch, because I know that's the last session between, I'm standing now between you and your lunch. For the next part of this session, I wanted to do something which was a little bit different. When we talk AI, when we talk RAG, when we talk agentic, in the vast majority of time, we talk about technology. We talk about algorithms, we talk about fantastic results or poor results, et cetera, but we don't necessarily talk about how we get there. From a political perspective, from a legal perspective, from a project management perspective. In fact, if you look at the headlines, I think there's a recent one claiming that 95% of Gen AI projects are failing. I think Ed's going to cover that tomorrow in his talk. Are they really failing, or were they not set up to be successful? And setting a project to be successful in the age of AI is slightly different. Why? Because the legal challenges are different than a normal project. The adoption challenges are somewhat different as well. So for the next segment, I'm going to invite on stage a couple of people that have been successful in that area, rolling out Gen AI projects at scale and driving their organization to adopt those technologies. So welcome on stage Ari, who's a general manager of applied AI at Moody's, as well as Narayan, who's a senior director of analytical science at Dow. Please come on stage. So thank you, Ari and Narayan, for joining me. Of course. Maybe you could start by a quick intro, because I know I had your bio up on top, but there was a lot of text there. Ari, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I got my wife in my head reminding me to sit up straight. You guys are going to have to serve that purpose now. Yeah, so I run applied AI at Moody's, and I think most of you should be familiar, I think, with the company Moody's, but it's actually two separate companies. Moody's Corporation is made up of a rating agency, which is a highly regulated business, and it's also made up of Moody's Analytics. Hello? Yeah, Moody's Analytics, which is more of a solutions, data-driven solutions business that kind of operates with some regulatory oversight, but not nearly as onerous as the rating agency. And so in that sense, I kind of have a view of how it operates on both sides, although my main focus is looking at how we operate on the Moody's Analytics side, which is half of the company, half of the business, $3.5 billion in revenue, and looking at the highest stakes workflows, the things that are going to really move the needle in the operation, and kind of reimagining them with AI and thinking about what are the capabilities that we need to make that happen. But the main kind of objective here is how do we take things that we used to do and have been doing for a while and completely rethink them, and that's my job.
Thank you. Narayan?
Narayan Ramesh, Senior Research and Development Director at Dow. So what I do is I lead a series of groups. I've got analytical sciences, which has a view of looking at everything across the company. Information research, which is where all the work that we do in terms of collecting data, curating data, developing models, hosting applications, all of that comes in, and environmental health and safety. So I have been in industry 25 years, all of it in research and development, worked with two different companies. And if you come to my talk a little bit later today, you'll sort of see the evolution of how data has changed within our industry, and why some of these advanced tools are so crucial for the speed at which we need to execute new developments, accelerate the pace of new innovation, and really bring more value to our customer base.
Thank you. Thank you, Narayan, for this intro. So both of you have successfully deployed numerous projects now, numerous AI projects. So what's your take on the type of arguments that it takes to actually convince your organization to adopt those changes? Because, there are several stages. Taking them through POCs and being successful, that's the easy part, I would say. Getting agreement around the investment, and then driving adoption. And driving adoption, we can break that in sub-questions, because we've got the legal challenges, the societal challenges, etc. So, Ari, do you want to start with us on the political aspect? How do you get the investment in those projects?
I don't know if my experience is completely applicable, but I don't ask permission. I look at something. I've been at Moody's for 25 years. I have a pretty good sense of what I think we need to do. I prototype it because it's pretty easy to build something these days. Prototype it usually at home, and then kind of add some bells and whistles, whatever, connect it to some mock data and run it by some people. And if they jump up excited, and then I know that there's something there, and then it just kind of grows from there. And that's how every single project is. No one actually asks. Well, there's people that say we could use help and whatever, but I kind of look at what is really going to move the needle, and I just kind of build it. Sometimes I will bring in domain experts if I don't feel sufficiently comfortable. But honestly, like nowadays, it's pretty easy to get familiar with everything. So.
But that's the prototyping side, that's the POC and research element.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
So
some of the
once
projects you've driven to thousands of users now, so
yeah.
that requires proper investment.
Yeah. So once you do that and you build the momentum, it's kind of like when you're introducing a product for clients. You can kind of test it, and you get enough clients that are committed and are willing to work and are excited about it, and then and obviously these I only pick these really high leverage, high impact workflows, and so the combination of people excited about it, wanting to use it, seeing the value, wanting to contribute, and the obvious benefits that it would generate, you kind of, it makes it actually quite straightforward in my case. I don't know. I hate it. I hate to suggest that it's not that hard, because I know for a lot of people it is very hard to do this, and it's not the most conventional way, but I really think the concept of building a working prototype takes you so far down the path of being able to make a case that, I don't do PowerPoints anymore. I've sworn off PowerPoints.
So, Ari, you're in a very data-centric business, so I imagine people are used to that. Narayan, how is it on your side? Because you're much more traditional manufacturing type of business.
Yeah, I would say, our challenge is quite different than that, right? So the prototyping is important. The next stage of, the culture change and getting everybody to adopt the tools is important. But we have a different challenge, and that is the workflows in different areas are quite different. So you can think of, something that starts at Catalyst, develops a new, let's say a new product or a new material. That new material has to be formulated. Ultimately, it goes into an application. And we might be one ingredient, or maybe 3 ingredients out of several in that formulation. So for us to be able to understand the connectivity between how our material influences the final properties, and what do we need to tweak at the very first stage of the process, is really not all that trivial, right? This work was done by researchers in a much more manual formulation type of way, designing new catalysts that, essentially on paper, trying it in the lab and then taking it to the next stage. So from there, over the last 2 decades, we have evolved to doing a lot of high throughput type of work, right? So where instead of doing one experiment at a time and multiplying it 10-fold or 100-fold, which is essentially doing 100 separate experiments, we are now able to do a lot of these in a high throughput manner, which means you're getting all 100 experimental data points at the same time, right? So the problem of sort of convincing people that this data needs to be used more effectively is not one that's a big challenge, right? Because volumes of data are being produced. In the past, if you could generate a data point a day, today you're generating 100 data points, orders of magnitude more of data a day. And so when you look at going through a whole year, there's a lot more information that's available. The challenge really is that the workflows across these different areas and the ingredients that we use and so forth are much more difficult. So how do you now get a prototype that can really impact all the different businesses, right? So we've, for us, that is, something where we spend a lot of time, trying to understand the tools that are available, trying to make sure that, there's a common base or a common platform from which everybody can build, and then you get into the cultural change and the scale, right? And that's where what we find is that typically through the entire organization, especially because we are a manufacturing-centric company, you've got different levels of skills through the entire organization. So, first, you need to develop the tools. Of course, the folks that we hire from university today, will have a lot more digital skills, but then we have to bring everybody along in the organization. We cannot have somebody operating in the mode that they were operating 20 years ago, and we've got a different tool that everybody that's new is operating. All that data has to be integrated in a much more seamless manner. So that really is our challenge. So how have we gone about this, right? So I think convincing everybody that that is needed is not really something that we get into a lot of argument about. Where we have to do all of our selling is really to help people see how to phase these different projects out, show that value can be generated along the way, and developing version 1 of a tool is actually not all that complicated. But then scaling from 2 through N, I think just because the space is so new, there is a tendency to believe that it's going to happen at the snap of a finger. And that is not true, right? Especially when you're dealing with large amounts of data, and perhaps one workflow looks a little different than another workflow. How do you sort of work in the architecture aspects, collect all the metadata up front? Those are the spaces where we have to spend more time. I'd say we're getting better at it, but we have certainly not evolved to the point where everybody intuitively gets it. Now, if I go tell somebody it's going to take 5 years to build a chemical plant, once the design is set, and it might take you a decade to come up with all the design elements for a plant, nobody blinks when they hear that. But if you go tell somebody that a project like this is going to take a couple, 2, 3 years to get it to fruition, that is very, very difficult for people to understand, right? So I think there is an element of education that is needed in this space.
So, but for what it's worth, I mean, it's not that different. I mean, it's more that the initial kind of buy-in you get through the prototype, and then you mentioned that there's kind of wins along the way, and I think they really do help when you bring those in. In my mind, every project is just kind of a living thing, and it really never ends, and it's just like you're going down a journey, and if people buy into the journey and you have the right KPIs and the right metrics and you're giving value, I don't, at least it seems like I've seen a lot more enthusiasm for people to, kind of engage and participate, in supporting it, and it's not a huge investment. At least it has this staging mechanism where you didn't deliver the value. So I haven't found it to be. I don't know if you have to build the case up front and you have to map the whole thing, and and you have an investment. That would be harder. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly we have to do that, right? Because there's a significant leap from building that prototype and showing how it can work to painting the picture, right? The ultimate picture. So that picture needs to be clear to everybody. The steps along the way are not always obvious to everyone, and that's where a lot of the time that is spent in the gnarliness of the effort sort of comes in. And sometimes that's underappreciated as to how much time and effort will need to be spent in that phase. So I think that's where our industry is evolving, and that's where our we need to do a better job of educating, and also building some of the infrastructure ahead of the prototype, right? So in a lot of cases we may not have the data. You may be able to jump through hoops, develop n equals 1, but then 2 through n has to be much more facile, right? We cannot give people the impression that 2 through n is straightforward if you don't have all the data architecture in place and all the metadata in place and things like that. And I think the future proofing of some of this is also not trivial, right? You cannot have a tool that is being developed today, and then tomorrow you look at it and say, okay, I got to change everything, the way it's hosted, the platform, and all that, and that causes a lot of rework, right? So that's another area where I think we need to evolve so that it's viewed, I'm going to say, more as a project than as a something that can just happen quickly without the necessary time, effort, and thought being put into it.
So both of you in the prep call highlighted the role of managing the legal stakeholder of those projects. You know, you operate in very different industries, but actually both of you have a regulated division, you know, with a lot of constraints. How did you navigate that? Harry, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I do sit on the AI governance committee, and I do have an ability to at least influence some of the way that we're thinking about things. But honestly, it's a challenge, and until our CEO got up and said, this is not an option. We have to transform the organization, and we may have to take certain risks in a measured fashion that we wouldn't have otherwise taken, because the opportunity cost of not doing this is so huge, and it's a kind of opportunity cost that is different from the way that it used to be. The effects of not taking action compound, and so you fall behind faster and faster if you're not taking action. And so there's a sense of like, it's somewhat, it actually changed a little bit since our conversations, is that kind of messaging started becoming much more robust in the organization, where this is not, where we have to get through all of those challenges because there's a conviction that action has to be taken.
What about on your side, Narayan? Because there's a lot of intellectual property in some of that data.
Yes. So in our space, first of all, we operate in 130 different countries, right? And each of these countries has different rules, different regulations. When you're looking at, and then we treat a vast majority of data. We've got the intellectual property, we've got the new developments that we make, the inventions that are patented, and ultimately, things that are very significant for our customer base. And then we've got things like, HR data related to people and things like that. So in my mind, the challenge that we run into is, and you could come up with very, very different answers depending on where you start. If you start with, I want to give everybody access based on, in other words, my philosophy is that I want everybody to have access to the data that is required for them to do their job. And then you end up with the legal compliance with legal requirements in different places. You end up in a very different answer than a very different situation than if you say, I'm only going to do this based on role specificity, and I'm not, in general, I'm going to be much more protective of my data. And then if legal requirements in different places require me to adjust that, then I adjust that. So now, for us as an organization, especially on the innovation side, that can be a pretty huge barrier if not everybody has access to all the different information because of legal reasons and things like that. So it's a constant sort of tussle, a struggle for us. But I think we're getting better at it every day, right? And at least for me, I keep having this discussion about the philosophy with everybody. Are we going to start from the point where everybody should have equal access to the information, and then you start to put the legal requirements in place? And if you do that, and you can generally get people to align with that philosophy, you end up in a much better spot. But having said that, we still end up with things that might be restricted to certain groups. They're restricted in certain countries just because of export control technologies and things like that. So our security systems have to be well defined and designed in order, and all this has to be done up front, right? I mean, you cannot start something and then say, okay, now I'm going to start putting the checks in place. It has to be designed because the The whole thing needs to operate at scale seamlessly once it's released. So it's an ongoing learning and a continuous learning process for everyone to figure out what the right balance is between these two, extremes of, I want to have access versus, I want to be much more protective of my data, and then, and then complying with the legal requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just note that, I started with a lot of the processes, and maybe it's the nature of the business where you're like a vendor of data and analytics and software. We don't have to deal with some of that, and I didn't start with a rating agency where it's more complex, there are a lot more issues there. So in our cases, like the sales process, the customer service process, the product development process, the kinds of things that don't necessarily generate the same level of challenge. I think that might explain the different experience that we've had.
Okay. Well, thank you both for that. I think we've got plenty of questions now, so let's turn to that.
Okay.
The first one, a lot of projects stall because value is assumed but not proven. What have you learned, and what can you share with us on how you've addressed that on the projects that you've gone live with already? Do you want to start, Narayan?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think that's a great question, and it's something that we struggle with as an industry and as a group. Now, for me, the learnings have been you want to show that you can generate value along the way. Now, sometimes you make some assumptions when you have a project that you just start, and some of those assumptions may or may not play out in execution in exactly the way that you envisioned. And the value has two parts of the equation, right? What can I generate, let's say, from a productivity standpoint or whatever it is, that might be compromised. Or on the other side, it might be the cost side of the equation, right? It might take more resources to build the tool than you first imagined. Clear and early communication is important, right? Especially when you run into, if you sense you're going to run into roadblocks. So for me, that's been the most significant sort of learning, to help everybody understand that this is a project. Just like any other project, you're going to run into, into potential roadblocks. Those roadblocks need to be dealt with, but expecting that it's going to go seamlessly is not a very likely outcome, right? Any project is going to run into some hurdles, and those hurdles need to be, those challenges need to be handled and solved. Now, the other piece of this is also the education and bringing the whole organization up to speed, because in the absence of, one of the biggest reasons why value is not generated is because everybody doesn't adopt the tool or embrace it in the same way, right? If you have 10% of the organization using it and 90% of the organization is not using it, you don't typically end up with the value that you're going to get, right, from a productivity standpoint or whatever it might be. So getting everybody to the same level of understanding from and training is super critical, right? And so at least for me, in my mind, I break the problem up into, let's make sure that the tool is able to provide the value as designed, and then let's make sure that we extract the value with the proper amount of training and essentially you have to, in some cases, ensure compliance for different parts of the organization to be able to use those tools. So to me, that's what will ultimately guide us towards success in this space.
I agree. I mean, generally, so I would say that you have to demonstrate the value in incremental steps, and you have to kind of create KPIs that have, that are indicative of progress. And if I, as an example, if we're building a system that amplifies the capabilities of the sales organization, and so we're giving them better leads and messaging, and so that's the near-term value. But everything that we're building has this has these mechanisms of self-learning and self-improvement. And everyone understands that the initial instantiation of the solution is not going to be as good as it'll be 6 to 12 months from now. And so you create this value right up front so that people are engaged, and because they're getting value from it. And so to me, like, we haven't had in many cases an adoption issue, because we make sure that the number one priority is to create value very quickly. But then we build everything as bi-directional. So the agents that we're building, or the AI systems that we're building, are not just adding value, they're ingesting value. They're asking, we are asking people to interact with them, and everyone seems to be interacting with them because they recognize that when they actually teach the AI, they get better outcomes. And when they teach the AI and they get better outcomes, we're kind of creating this shared intelligence kind of substrate that helps create value, increase value over time. So it's just how you structure it and how you add value, and yeah, there's a lot of stumbles along the way, sure. I mean, of course, and people are forgiving, I'm finding. Maybe a year from now they won't be, but hey, it's always like it's AI. I don't know. It's like,
So, thank you both. Let's go through the next one. How do you get your AI system to be more accurate? And actually, I'll grab that one actually to start with. And
sure.
You can carry on afterwards. This is a really interesting topic, and one that doesn't have a very simple answer. You can do things in traditional project management type method. You can do information science, data science type of studies, but the reality is the volume of data, the pace of interactions means that it is actually hard to measure and to drive, and that's one of the factors for our investment into Nuclear, into the Progress Agentic RAG platform. John mentioned a tool called REMI, the RAG evaluation matrix. So as part of the Progress Agentic RAG, we've actually trained a model to detect the groundlessness and the accuracy of models, of responses, identify how suited the response is to the question, and identify if there are any knowledge gaps in the knowledge graph that we have. So because this is actually a tremendously complicated area. I mean, do you know if you're hallucinating because you're missing data or because you've got incorrect data? So it's a work in progress. It's a really emerging field, but we've made some strategic investment in that area to help you with those type of issues. So I know you don't have access to that yet. It went live. It's went GA on September 10th, so all brand new. But how do you deal with that situation today?
That is an absolute challenge. As you said, it is not easy, and it's not even easy to define what accurate means. It's like, are you retrieving the right information? Are you interpreting it correctly? Are you able to replicate the same outcome every time? It is so many different dimensions to accuracy that you're trying to solve for, and some become more important in different contexts. And there's so many different techniques and ways to handle that. It's probably not the right time or forum to kind of go through all of them, but certainly the discussions around the ways that you guys, Progress, Smart Logic, able to help with that, definitely are part of that, and it's a massive exercise in context engineering and modern techniques, and it's probably going to be one of those. Heck, I don't know. You saw this like crazy latest thing that Miriam Roddy came out with, like where with the GPU batching. I don't know if people caught it. There's a whole new dimension of accuracy coming through. So it's a challenge. It's hard, and well, that's kind of job security, I guess.
Naren, how do you deal with that on R&D data?
Yeah, for us, we have to break the problem up, right? So let me maybe give you a couple of instances to give you a sense for the kinds of things that we deal with. we have a large repository of internal reports. I mean, these are, we're by law required to hold on to them for decades, right? So they take a particular technology that we've been practicing for the last 5 decades. There are probably 5 decades worth of reports related to that area. Now, in that time frame, you can imagine a lot of things have changed, right? The nomenclature that people may have used may have changed. Not everybody for a chemical may have used the IUPAC name for that particular chemical. We may have an internal way of referring to something, the structures, maybe somebody has drawn something inaccurately and so forth. Now, I would say those set of challenges are a little bit more straightforward to tackle. It takes work, right? But it's classic blocking and tackling. Write down the structures, you get the experts, ask them what other name can all these different things be known as, et cetera, right? Now, that doesn't make it any easier, but it does make it much more tractable. But now you end up in let me contrast that with something else where perhaps the analytical technique to measure a property of a material has changed and evolved over a period of time. Do you even know that you have all the information to figure out how that data has changed as a function of time? Do you know, for instance, how to classify the data, based on when it was actually generated? A lot of the metadata may or may not exist. So now, what do? Do you throw that data out because it was, its origins are not known and all the metadata doesn't exist, or do you keep it, and do you tag it in a different way so that it's only used for certain types of modeling when it is ultimately used for predictions and things like that? That, I think, is a much more challenging type of problem to tackle, because you need a lot of metadata. You almost need to get to the level of understanding what instrument did I use, when did I actually calibrate it, what column did I use, and all of these things change almost certainly on an annual basis, but they may change at a greater frequency than that. And that, I think, is much more difficult to solve. And you almost, I think, have to get the right metadata and then rely on the judgment. And then ultimately, you might be able to train the tool to say, if I'm doing a range finding type of modeling experiment, then use all the data. If I'm trying to do a prediction where I really want to figure out what formulations to make, I need to be much more accurate, right? So, but without the right level of tagging, you're not going to get there, right? And that metadata, it's almost impossible to go reconstruct it for the last, several decades, right? So that may have to be something that moves forward.
That's a perfect segue, actually, to the next question. So let me stop you here, which is a question around interoperability. How do you keep context? How do you keep the fidelity and the richness of data as you access information silos, legacy systems, etc.?
Yeah. So it's a tough challenge, right? But when you look at it, you have to really ask the researchers, and it's a little bit of training and thinking, right? Researchers on the bench need to start thinking about, if I look at this data 3 years from now, or 5 years from now, or even a year from now, when I don't have the same level of intimacy with that particular project, can I reconstruct the data, right? And what do I need in order to be able to reconstruct that? Are you going to get it 100% right by doing all of this? No, but it'll be a heck of a lot better than it is today, right? Because there are some implicit assumptions I make. Oh, I have not changed the column for the last 6 weeks. And so it's been running on the same column. So I can just go look it up, right? Even if I didn't have the information. That's not the case, when you wind the clock forward a year, right? Clearly the instrument is not operating with that same column as an example, right? You also need to know, so for me, it's really about getting individuals to start thinking about what metadata they need to collect, get it as right as possible. Are you going to get it 100% right? You're probably not going to get it 100% right, and so there's going to be some level of rework, but you want to keep that to a minimum. And then all of this data also needs to be captured in a format, et cetera, that is future-proof, right? So if the data is captured in a certain way and now you have to go save the data in a different format or a different manner in order to be able to search, then that becomes a lot more challenging. Now, I think the new systems that we have, even with things like much better searchability with large language models, the context that the models are able to look at and so forth, I think that's becoming a little bit more straightforward and easier. But it starts with researchers really looking at it and saying, if I look at this data a year from now, for me to be able to reconstruct it, what do I need?
So our question is slightly different, but consistent with the logic. And so it's just such a daunting concept to say interoperability, especially we're managing like massive amounts of data. And so the idea is I'm trying to reinforce this idea of a use case back. And so what is the ultimate use case, and then what information needs to connect to deliver to it? And then you kind of just prioritize the use cases and make sure that those pieces that are needed for it are at least communicating and tagged properly, and there's at least a knowledge graph mechanism over those pieces of information that you need. So it's just trying to contain it, and it's so intimidating to try to solve the whole thing at once.
Thank you both. How do you see the balance shifting between human expertise and machine-driven analytics? Narayan, do you want to start?
Yeah, another really good question. I think we have grown up, if you look at the way, at least the industry that I come from has evolved, is there's a lot that's actually in people's brains, right? The relationships are also important, but in addition to that, there are implicit assumptions to how certain groups of customers work, for instance. So I don't think we're going to be at a situation where we can completely disconnect the human for a long time. But it's going to be one where the analytics that are available will make us be able to function in a much more efficient and effective manner. So for me, the real challenge is how do you get somebody, the assumption or the risk is that people are going to be able to do work at a much faster rate and the information is available. But it's all about the quality of the questions that you ask, right? So how do you get somebody up the learning curve fast enough that the quality of the questions that somebody is asking don't require 20 years of experience, but can be done with 2, 3, 5 years worth of experience, right? So to me, that's the way the balance I think is going to shift, at least in the industry that I work in. But I don't think it's going to get to the point where it's 100% machine, 0% individual. It may be if it 10 years ago, if it was 100% human and 0% machine, that is going to continuously change as a function of time, with humans providing probably supervisory capability to questions that can be asked of algorithms to be able to drive the right kind of responses. So in other words, get the work product rather than collecting the data and developing a model and analyzing the data and so forth. Machines are going to do a lot of that, but then the final decision is really what will need to be taken by the human.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. One question is whether that's a formality or at some point. But sure, sounds right. But I do think for quite some time, certainly for the foreseeable future, in my mind, there's just really not enough. That you can't get the maximum that you can achieve with AI without humans coaching it. As I kind of think of AI now more as the apprentice, and all that implicit knowledge that's so important is the job of people to kind of get that apprentice to the point where it could actually do a lot more, learn, adapt, and then there's going to be a point where you can do enough, and then those individuals could actually supervise more of those. And so that model kind of fits well with I think the reality and the way that it resonates, because I think everyone understands that there's certain things they know that are not written anywhere, and then the AI that comes back, and they have to like, no, that's not the right way to think about it. So it's going to learn over time. My fear is what happens when we're done teaching AI that implicit knowledge, and then there's the Imran kind of conversation that I'm dying to have. Can't wait about, you know, how do we protect that privacy of our knowledge, and because that's just our experience and our wisdom, and do we, you know, we should own it? Does the company own it? I don't know. Those are going to be interesting questions.
Thank you. What benefit did you gain that surprised you by operating AI at scale?
You want to go first?
Well, so the benefit is that you can do a lot more with the same number of people. I mean, you know, in increasing, you're going to have to do that much more, and so it's an amplification vehicle. So if you think of it as initially kind of assisting people, and then kind of an augmentation, which to me is a little bit higher level. I don't know, it's semantics, but an amplification really means that whatever you were able to do before, there's so much more that you can accomplish now. I think a lot of us are feeling it already, and so you do that at scale, you should be able to deliver much faster and higher output, better results from it, and we're seeing that. We're already seeing that. It's just the beginning. I mean, so we're going to see a lot more of that.
I want to go back to a recent situation that I found myself in. I was actually looking to study a variety of the programs that the NSF had to offer, and the question really says, what benefit did you gain that really surprised you, right? So I had to learn a different way of doing this, right? So the prompts and all that are fine. I mean, you would expect that Copilot or ChatGPT or whatever your favorite version of AI is can go in and search for all this information and get back to you with things that perhaps you didn't know. But then you also have to validate some of this information, right? So what's the fastest way to validate it? Do I just go and read all the stuff again, in which case it's pointless, right? I mean, I've not really gained the benefit. But what I had to sort of teach myself is to go figure out who the experts were, and then go, ping them at some, and obviously I can't show them everything and say, help me understand this, because then, again, it's not productive, right? So to me, the insight really was that all of us will probably have to work in different ways in order to validate the information that you get and be able to move at a faster pace, because that's going to be the expectation, right? The expectation is that because you have all this information at your fingertips, you're now able to operate much faster, much more efficiently. But how do you know that you're actually getting the right level of information? And how do you know that you're not presenting, among the 10 points that are valid, maybe the one that is not maybe totally accurate? And how do you then ensure that you're driving towards the right outcome, right? So I think we all have to learn a different way of looking at the input that you get, and even if it does look like it makes sense, how do you truly validate that information? I think that was also brought out in a lot of conversations today, but I think that is not a trivial challenge that we'll all have to encounter in the way we do our work.
So thank you both. Very interesting conversation, a lot of insight in how you've deployed AI applications at scale in your organizations. Thank you to all of you for the questions you submitted.